Start, Tom. Welcome.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the intro. And Stiffy, I think I see you letting people in from the waiting room. So if you could continue that, that'd be great. Appreciate everyone joining us this evening. I'm going to be talking about a path forward to managing the decline of oil in New Mexico. And of course, I am Tom Solomon, co-coordinator with Jim McKenzie of 315 New Mexico. And I'm going to share my screen. Oil, a managed decline in New Mexico. And the content tonight is going to start with a review of why we need to do it, which is, of course, climate change. Talk about oil's declining future, um, how the climate crisis is affecting New Mexico and the benefits of declining oil production, and how we move to a sustainable economy and a budget without oil revenue. And finally, a path to decarbonize the entire state. And so we begin here with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, which has been issuing dire warnings for the last decades. This one in particular, where the UN Secretary General said this is a code red for humanity, and a report must sound a death knell for coal and other fossil fuels before they destroy the planet. And since then, of course, the planet has continued to warm. 2024 was yet again the warmest year on record, continuing that trend. 2025 looks like it's going to be similar, maybe not quite as warm, but right up there, close to 1.6, which is bad news. And the main reason, of course, is that the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is driving this warming. And the overwhelming contributor to that, as documented in this chart from the IPCC, is the emission of carbon dioxide and methane from fossil fuels and industry. It's well over two-thirds of the problem. And if we're going to have any chance of preserving a livable climate, we need to reduce those emissions quite drastically. And this is the decline chart that was in that same report, showing that we really need to cut emissions in half by 2030, in half again by 2040, and to net zero by 2050. And sadly, we are not on a path to do that, which doesn't make it any less urgent. So that's the intro and the reason why. Let's talk about oil's declining future, because some good news is that global oil demand has largely plateaued, and I'll show you that chart. The EV transition is cutting into oil demand. The shale oil plays are topping out, and costs are rising. And as future demand declines and prices drop, quite likely scenario is that oil will be priced out of the market, at least fracking-based expensive oil in New Mexico. This is that chart of world supply of oil globally, going from 2018 through the current year. And you can see in 2018, world production hit about 102 million barrels a day. 7 years later, it is barely higher at 103 million barrels a day. And compare that to the rate of growth that we saw from 2010, where it was 87 million. And if that rate of growth from that period of time had continued through today, we would be over 112 million barrels a day. And we're not, we're at 103, which means oil demand globally is basically flattening. And a major reason why is the cannibalization of oil demand by the growing number of electric vehicles on the road. This chart from the International Energy Agency says globally, the adoption of EVs is set to reduce oil demand by about 6 million barrels a day by 2030 and 13 million by 2035. And that is continuing. And the trend of growing EV sales is quite dramatic. We don't see as much of it in the US because the lion's share of the growth is actually in China. But Europe is also growing, as is the United States. And EV sales were 25% of all car sales in 2025, growing from about 17 percent the prior year. EV sales are also still growing in the United States. They were up about 15% year over year so far. That's not the news that a lot of us consume because people are really trying to um, undercall it. But the fact is, EVs are actually growing in all the countries, U.S. included. Moving on to the Permian Basin, where we do most of our oil production in the United States. We pretty much extracted all of the cheapest oil in the Permian Basin. And a measure of that is what they call the break-even price for oil. So the Dallas Federal Reserve puts out a survey every year and they ask the oil companies themselves what kind of an oil price per barrel they would need in order to break even on the cost of drilling a new well. And in 2021, that cost was at $49 a barrel. Just 4 years later, it's 31% higher at $65 a barrel. So that means it's getting more and more expensive to drill those new wells. And if you compare that to the cost of extracting oil in the Middle East at $27 a barrel for break even, there is a lot of room for the oil sheikhs, if they want to reclaim that market share from the US, to drop the price to say, $45 a barrel and drive all of the U.S. Permian fracking companies out of business because they would just be losing money hand over fist. And that may well happen as oil demand drops and the people scramble to provide that last little bit. These are the shale oil basins in the United States. There are 9 of them, and they have all the production in all of them has plateaued. They're still producing, but oil rate of extraction is not increasing in any of them except for the Permian Basin. Permian Basin is still rising a bit. It's forecasted to continue rising through about 2031 and then start to decline. And that is a forecast by our own legislative finance council in the state of New Mexico legislature. This is a chart that they have published for the last several years running. Comes from an internationally recognized oil analysis firm called Rystad Energy. It's the New Mexico Long-Term Production Outlook. And you can see the growth in oil production leading up to 2030, 2031, where it'll peak. And then it starts to decline. This is as forecasted by the New Mexico legislature, quoting this chart. Of course, it's not fast enough to preserve a livable climate, which would need to get us to zero by 2050, but it is still significant declines forecasted that we will have to prepare for. And this is the actual graph from the Dallas Federal Reserve documenting the range of break-even prices in various portions of the Permian Basin. Break-even ranges from $61 to $70 a barrel with an average of 65. So that's where that data comes from. The actual price of oil in the U.S. market, the West Texas Intermediate WTI price of oil has actually been below that $65 a barrel break-even price for 5 of the last 7 months. This is a snapshot from Saturday. It's right around the same price today, $61.50 a barrel. So Permian oil producers are not making a lot of money right now. And in fact, a lot of them are probably losing some money because it's below break even for drilling a new well. So turning to the climate crisis in New Mexico, our state is the second fastest warming state in the nation. Number 1 is Alaska, and we are seeing the effects of that in drought and rising water scarcity and increases in wildfires and heat waves and flooding and the burn scars, and in rising insurance rates. New Mexico water scarcity is getting worse. This lower left chart is a graph going back to the year 2000, showing the levels of drought in the state year by year. And on the right was this year's chart in May, where 96% of the state was in drought before the monsoon rains began. and that has been fairly typical in a lot of recent years. So we are in a long-term drought cycle, making water that much more precious for the state. And it's having an impact, including on tree deaths, which doubled in 2024, according to that report. It's a combination of warming and water scarcity and all of those factors. So not good for the state. Nationally, we've seen an increasing level of billion-dollar disasters. This is as cataloged by NOAA, at least it was through last year. And the main sources of those billion-dollar disasters has been, severe storms attributable to the warming planet. And wildfires are also increasing. And this report shows that the average size of New Mexico wildfires has basically doubled in the last decade, the number of acres burned per wildfire. So hitting us in a number of ways. And climate impacts are driving up insurance rates. This is another way to look at those billion-dollar disasters. And for the first time, New Mexico actually made the list of billion-dollar disasters with our wildfires in 2024. Not good news for us. And this and other factors related to climate change are driving up home insurance rates around the country. Some of the worst states are in Florida and Louisiana and Utah. But in New Mexico, even New Mexico counties are seeing greater than 20% hikes in home insurance rates, and insurance rates in Taos increase as much as 45%. So people are seeing it in their pocketbooks. The benefits of a managed decline in oil production would be quite a few. These are just some of them. It'll reduce the amount of oil pollution from oil and gas, which will benefit our health. It'll stop fracking's destruction of fresh water. It'll significantly cut water use in power plants because they are a big consumer of fresh water, and growing liabilities from unplugged wells, and allow us to start to recover the polluted lands from fossil fuels. Air pollution causes about 9 million deaths per year globally. This is just one of many reports on that subject. I think it's from Harvard University. And it showed that 13% of all deaths in the United States were due to fossil fuel pollution. If you translate that number to the state of New Mexico, that would mean about 2,400 deaths annually in the state of New Mexico attributable to just pollution from burning fossil fuels. So as this goes down, some of those people will live instead of dying. Water use is also a big factor related to fossil fuel burning and consumption. This is data extracted from a report from the Office of the State Engineer, OSE, and they published it in November of 2024, looking at the baseline year of 2020. And a couple of things jump out. One is that water withdrawn by the fossil fuel power plants, the 18 from gas fire, one from coal, is water. That water use is 5 times the amount of water used by the city of Santa Fe. So fossil fuel power plants use a lot of water. Water withdrawn by the oil and gas operation in the state, a lot of it for fracking, is more than the city of Las Cruces. And this was in 2020. Oil production has doubled since 2020, so that number is probably twice as bad as it was back then. And then finally, produced water is not only the water consumed by the oil and gas operations, but the toxic water that comes up from the subsurface. It amounts to huge amounts, 84 billion gallons in 2024, which is 257,000 acre feet, swamping these two factors. And it's gotten so bad that the oil industry is basically running out of room to put it. They typically pump it back underground in some abandoned oil wells, but that causes earthquakes. and they used to give it to the state of Texas. Texas doesn't want it anymore, and so they are now pressuring the state government to allow its use outside of the oil field, and that is an ongoing fight. I mentioned that we'd be able to recover the lands damaged by fossil fuels. That amounts to 1.3% of all land used in the United States. This comes from the textbook from Mark Jacobson, um, linked at the bottom. And the big hitters here, of course, are active oil wells and abandoned oil wells, millions of them, and then the millions and millions of kilometers of gas and oil pipeline. And that impacts the landscape to the tune of 1.3% of all the land in the United States. The good news is that when we replace it with 100% clean energy, there will be much less of an impact to the land, and we will be able to start to recover some of this damaged acreage. This is what some of those oil fields look like from the air. We have 73,000 active oil and gas wells in the state, more than 60,000 old ones that need to be plugged. And if you live in southern New Mexico, um, I can't imagine living in this environment. If you live in, Eunice or Hobbs, you may have one of these things right across the street from you or right across from your daughter's school. So those are some of the benefits if we start to decline the amount of oil production in our state. We have to replace the revenues that come from the oil industry because it's a big contributor to the state government's budget. So, all of the teachers and firefighters and roads, all of that's funded by our state taxes, and about 35% of general fund revenues come from oil and gas currently. Used to be about half of that. Interestingly, it's only about 3% of the workforce that works in the oil fields, and I'll show you what that is. Um, Fortunately, we have a plan to transition out of that, and I'll show you that shortly. This chart from LFC, Legislative Finance Committee, shows the composition of oil revenues. About 19% of it is direct revenues to the state general fund. Um, and then if you add in the components that get captured by gross receipts tax, personal and corporate income taxes, that bumps it up to about 35%. And again, that's about double what it was a decade or so ago when it was typically 15 to 20%. So it's grown a lot as oil production has grown a lot. We don't, however, use much of that oil and gas. 90% of it is exported to other states, possibly other countries. We consume only 7% of the gas and 10% of the oil that we produce, according to the US EIA. And this just shows you the significant increase in oil production over the last many years. Since 2011, oil production has increased by a factor of 10 higher, 10x higher than it was in 2011. And you look at that and you go, well, oil industry employment must have grown a lot in that last 15 years or so, but that's not the case. Under 3% of the workforce in the state is in the oil and gas industry. It's about 24,000, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the employment is pretty cyclical, but you don't see that increase in employment that was shown in this previous chart. It doesn't look anything like that. In fact, you could say that it's actually declining. And this year, there have been some major announcements of layoffs in the oil fields, Chevron and some others more recently, as oil and gas prices are going down. New Mexico is one of four states, is the number four state most beholden to oil and gas in terms of the percentage of our GDP that comes from that sector. There are 8 states where it's more than 1%. But that means there are 42 other states that are not. And so it is possible to construct an economy not dependent upon the oil and gas industry. And we can do that. And we have to do that because it's bad for our state. Uh, we are the 44th worst diversified economy in the nation among all the US states. Interestingly, our neighboring Colorado, which also has a pretty big oil sector, is number 11. And what they have that we don't is a significant manufacturing sector and trade and professional services. And so that's where we need to see some growth to get to a sustainable economy. And the good news is that we've been working on that for a number of years. The State Economic Development Department, um, encouraged by the passage of Senate Bill 112 in 2021, which established the Sustainable Economy Task Force, identified these nine sustainable economy sectors that need to grow in order to replace um, extraction industries. And so it's, aerospaces and biosciences and outdoor recreation, and sustainable agriculture, lots of green energy, global trade, et cetera. And we have been working on that. And this is a report issued just this year, an update to their state plan, highlighting in Chapter 4 the need to reduce reliance on extractive industries. And you can read it at that link if you choose to. By the way, I didn't mention it. I will give you a link to all of these slides. And I'll send it out to everybody who signed up on Zoom later on in the week, along with the recording. Clean energy growth in the state is a real highlight. In June of this year, we had 7,400 megawatts of operating wind, solar, and battery storage, which is 50% or more of the total grid. We are ahead of schedule on that, which is great news. And it's providing a lot of good jobs in clean energy, 13,000 clean energy jobs, not quite as much as the oil and gas sector, but these are growing at about 6% per year. Now, we will probably see a hit to this rate of growth in the next year or so as the Trump administration does its best to kneecap solar and especially wind energy. But the need to increase clean energy, especially to fulfill the mandate for the Energy Transition Act in the state, is still there, and we still need to see growth in this industry in order to meet state law. Okay, so that's that section. Now we're going to turn to how do we get to a budget that doesn't rely on oil revenue because we know it's going to start to decline. And, continuing to grow those nine sustainable economic sectors that we just looked at has to be number one. Number two is to continue growing our very substantial, now $67 billion pool of sovereign wealth funds managed by the State Investment Council. Provides a lot of revenue to the state. Do those things along with tempering the growth of the state budget will help. And if required, we actually do have room to increase the tax rates on upper incomes. And so we'll take a look at that. This is a table of some of the factors showing how the sustainable economy is actually growing. Manufacturing is now employs about 29,000 in the state. These are some of the top employers, and they're growing again. Good news, just recently published this year, is that professional and businesses services actually grew 4 times faster in New Mexico than the U.S. average. So that's great. Trade growth with New Mexico is quite healthy. This is a Dallas Fed chart of the amount of trade that is seen in all of the border crossings with New Mexico. And this red line at the top is the New Mexico Santa Teresa border crossing. And you can see it's booming quite well. And so that's good for us. And we 5 years ago didn't have a cannabis industry, and we now do in the state, and it employs 5,100 people. So that's a new sector. An area where we do need improvement is our internet availability, among other factors that needs to improve, but we are the 10th worst in the nation in terms of availability of a good internet connection to our citizens. I talked about the sovereign wealth fund. So as the oil and gas industry contributes revenue to the state, provides severance tax revenue to extracting oil, and provide some money to the land grant permanent funds that comes from state trust lands. All of that money is going to grow all this big pool of our sovereign wealth funds, and it's grown quite substantially. In the last 10 years, since 2015, it grew from $20 billion to 67 billion, more than tripled in the last 10 years, and it is on a path to continue, mostly due to that booming amount of oil that we're producing. And just the revenue from this big pool of money now provides about $2 billion a year in interest for the state budget. It's about 20% of the total state budget. And DFA, the Department of Finance and Administration, took a look at that and the growth, and they said that the amount of interest thrown off by our sovereign wealth funds could actually surpass oil industry revenue by 2038, some years from now. And this is the list of funds that make up that big pool of $67 billion. And in the red box, I want to highlight the fact that there are, 6 different funds that didn't exist just 4 years ago in 2021. So we're socking money away for good purposes like conservation and higher education. We have a capital equipment reserve, behavioral health trust, workforce development, all of that good stuff, investing in New Mexico's future, helping us to grow a sustainable economy and preserve our environment. And I mentioned there's room to grow our top income tax rates if we needed to. 2003, it used to be 8.2% was the top income rate. It is now 5.9%. So there is room to bump it back up if we had to, if that had to be part of the solution. And wrapping that whole picture up, I attempted to do that on this chart. Let's see if it makes sense to you. So this chart here is from the Legislative Finance Committee, and the black line shows growth in revenue. So that's just money flowing into the state from taxes and interest and other sources. The yellow bars are budgets, and they are actually showing budgets growing at 6% per year, which is twice the rate of inflation. And state budgets have grown recently for very good reasons to address historical inequities in child care and education and in just salaries paid to state workers. But, maybe it doesn't have to continue to grow at twice the rate of inflation. And if it doesn't, if it grows at somewhat less and revenues continue to increase like that, there will be significant headroom to keep investing in our growing sovereign wealth funds, which will increase the amount of interest income to the state and allow us to see a path to replacing oil and gas revenues. And we don't need to replace all 35% of oil and gas to the budget. Again, a decade or so ago, it was ranging in the 15 to 20% range. So that's a path forward. Final section on decarbonizing New Mexico. Want to highlight the great success that the Energy Transition Act is having. We passed this in 2019. It requires getting to 100% renewable energy in the way we generate electricity, requires 50% renewables on the grid by 2030. And for the big utilities to get to zero carbon by 2045, and for the co-ops by 2050. And the good news is it is working. It is working very well. In fact, we are 5 years ahead of schedule to hitting renewables at 50%. Instead of 2030, we hit it last year. The average production for all of 2024, due to solar and wind and a tiny bit of hydro, was just a bit above 50%, and that growth is continuing. This chart shows how, where that's been growing from. Big increases in wind generation, solar is really starting to grow, and coal has declined and declined as it should because it's the dirtiest source of energy. And nationally, and including it here in New Mexico, renewables have been 93% of all new capacity that's added for the very good reasons that it is the cheapest source of new energy, it is clean, and it is some of the fastest to deploy. You can build a solar and battery farm after you get the permits in under a year, and it takes significantly more than that to build a new gas, maybe more than a decade to build a new nuclear plant. And the other reason, of course, is that battery costs and solar costs have been declining quite dramatically, and they continue to. Just since 2019, cost of solar plus battery dropped another 43%. And there is every sign that this will continue, at least internationally. We'll see what it looks like after all the tariffs are imposed. But, you know, we will have a new administration in 3.5 years, and I look forward to that. This busy chart shows all of that information about the cost of energy production in one chart. This is from a pretty well-renowned firm called Lazard Investment and Banking. It's an international firm that publishes the data on the levelized cost of energy for all sources of renewable generation and conventional, aka baseload generation. And again, these are unsubsidized costs in dollars per megawatt hour, so no tax subsidies included in any of this. Um, a couple of points to make. Solar is absolutely the cheapest source of electricity. If you add batteries to a solar project, it typically adds about half, about 56% of above solar alone. But even with those two together, it is very competitive with a combined cycle gas plant. And of course, it is the costs are declining for solar and batteries, and it is clean, doesn't provide any of that pollution, and you don't have to pay for the fuel. Geothermal energy, which I have to mention because I am the #1 state advocate for geothermal. It is half the cost of a new nuclear power plant, which is listed down here as the #1 most expensive source of baseload power. So that is the picture of renewable energy. Oh, and I made a little table showing the averages for each one of those if you want to look at that. New Mexico is very, very well positioned for renewable energy production. We have arguably the best combination of renewables in the state. There is no other state that has, this good solar plus wind plus geothermal energy. And we need to take advantage of that. If the amount of transmission existed in order to ship all of the renewable energy we could produce in the state to the rest of the country, New Mexico by itself could power all of the US, literally all of the United States, if we had the transmission. We have so much renewable energy. And the last part of what has to happen in order to decarbonize the remaining 50% of the grid is to replace the remaining natural gas power plants and our one coal plant in the Four Corners. And an opportunity to do that is to look at where these power plants line up with the best renewable or geothermal resources in the state, which tends to be along the Rio Grande Rift. And quite a number of these power stations line up with what look like some pretty good geothermal potential. And that needs to be studied. And of course, every one of these power stations already has a grid connection, and that valuable infrastructure could just be reused if you were to repower the station with geothermal right underneath the land that it's currently sitting on. And then finally, and thanks to Steffi Weisberg, who put and continues to lead this project, put this together, we need to electrify all the uses of fossil fuel in our cars, in our gas furnaces and boilers, etc. And there is a very good page on the 350 New Mexico website called Electrify New Mexico. The link is there to explain all about how you can electrify all uses of fossil fuels. And wrapping up, couldn't resist some debunking of talking points that too many of us hear. And they are these three things. Renewables actually don't take very much land. Um, New mining is actually beneficial and required, and don't kill me for that. But there is a path forward that it has to go through new mining. And often we hear, well, what is China doing? So let's talk about each one of these in turn. Um, there is a published plan, more than one, for what it takes to get New Mexico to 100% renewable energy, even after you electrify everything. So no use of fossil fuels whatsoever in transportation and heating, et cetera. And published by Stanford University, this is what that looks like. The mix, depending which uses, what New Mexico has in abundance. 26% wind, 72% solar, and some geothermal. And it would require about 3 times as much nameplate capacity as we currently have on the grid. So a lot of growth and building that would be required to get there. But the amount of land that it would take to do that is pretty small. It was a little bit less than 1% of New Mexico land needed to build all of that renewable energy generation, all of that wind, all of that solar. This is the wind slice is the blue piece, and the solar is the barely visible yellow slice. And the best news is that 90% of the land is actually spacing between wind turbines. So all of that inner turbine land can be used for grazing or grasslands or whatever it's currently being used today. Only 7/100ths of 1% of New Mexico land would be used for solar farms. And we do need to mine our way out of this quandary. We have to build the clean energy future. We have to build all the wind turbines and batteries and heat pumps and electric vehicles to run on clean electricity that's not being yet done today. That means mining a significant amount of critical minerals. And these are some of the ones that we're talking about: copper, lithium, nickel, cobalt, some rare earths, and some others. But the amount of mining is really pretty small, and it comes with a tremendous benefit that for every little bit of critical minerals that you mine, 535 times that amount of fossil fuels mining is eliminated. Um, and that's because we currently, on our current energy system, mine and burn 15 billion metric tons of coal, oil, and natural gas every year. The amount of critical minerals that we will need to mine to replace all of that with a clean energy system is this little blip right at the bottom of the line. And so that's what we need to mine in 2040. And if, the ratio in it, which is 28 million metric tons, not billion, but million. The ratio of 28 million to 15 billion is 535 times. So the path forward to stop burning all of these fossil fuels and not stop relying on them is to mine this amount of critical minerals. And another way to put that in context is just to look at the amount of metals mining that we currently do in the globe today, which is about 2.8 billion tons. Almost all of it, 93%, is iron ore, that big chunk. And the critical part of it for high technology that everybody talks about, lithium and cobalt and some rare earths, is this little tiny bit over here in the corner. It is 1/100th of that 2.8 billion tons. And then you add on to that some additional amount of copper and aluminum and some other nickel, some other factors. But we're really not talking about a lot of additional mining in the context of what we already do. So some mining necessary, and we absolutely have to do it in the most environmentally sensitive way that is also, pays attention to the needs of the local communities where the mining is done. We can do that. And then finally, um, the question is no longer regarding China. What are they doing? And we, use them an excuse for being a laggard in terms of our conversion to clean energy. China has actually added more clean energy than the rest of the world combined since 2019, 4 times more clean energy than the United States. The amount of growth in the clean energy kind of economy in China is just amazing. So the question is no longer what about China? The question is what about the rest of us? So um, the public wants climate action, and we underestimate it by how much? We typically underestimate the support for climate action by about 50%. 54% of Americans are concerned or alarmed about global warming, and we typically think it's about half of that. So we need to rely on the fact that the the broad public is behind us, is with us, and there are a few naysayers, but they are very loud, but fewer in number. Unfortunately, very well funded. Last slide. We should actively plan for the end of oil. The climate crisis, because of burning all those fossil fuels, is hitting New Mexico among the hardest of all of the states. We're warming second fastest in the nation. Um, the decline of oil production in the state is forecasted by our Legislative Finance Committee. Not as fast, but we already know it has to decline. Fortunately, we've been working on an economic transition plan to deal with it, and we can now see a path forward to a sustainable economy, and we should embrace it. And let me make one last statement, which is I didn't say much about how we get to manage the oil decline part. I know I didn't because that is basically a political decision. Um, and it's going to have to happen with all of our help. I don't see it happening in the next year or two or three, but climate change and its impact is going to continue to get worse, not better. And we will start to see the decline of oil and oil pricing, and all of those things combined may ultimately get us to the point where we can manage the decline and help us preserve a livable climate. And that is my talk for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. That was really good. I've heard this before, but it's gets more and more meaningful every day.
Thanks, Tiffy. Yeah, so any questions? Yeah, Steffi may see some in the chat. Feel free to let me know what those were. And or we can just open it up to the audience.
There's only one question in the chat, and that was
Okay.
from Paula. Paula, I don't know if you want to ask it verbally yourself, or I can read it for you.
Go ahead and read it if it's understandable. If
Sure.
not, I'll elaborate. Thank you.
On the slide where you were showing break-even prices for oil from the Permian here versus the Saudis and the Middle East, Paula asked, do you know if the Middle East countries are murmuring about raising their prices but still undercut the cost in the Permian Basin?
They don't tell me, but I'll tell you what they have been doing, which is overproducing, which ends up having a similar effect. So, one of the reasons why the price of oil is under pressure and going down is because countries like Saudi Arabia and others have basically said we're going to produce more than what we had been before. Um, and create a bit of a glut in the global oil market, which will drive down prices. And so um, they are doing that for, their own benefit. They get more revenue, obviously, by producing more oil, and it is having the effect of depressing oil prices. Um, and it's likely that that will continue. I don't know how much more headroom they have to continue to increase their output. They probably have some, and that's realistically how the prices would actually go down by them overproducing.
Thank you.
That's my best answer to that one. Thanks.
Looks like Muriel has a question. You have to unmute.
I'm always a little nervous about this because my engineering background is nil. But my question is, I understood what you said, I think, about we need better transmission. We need to really increase our ability to have transmission lines so that we can provide our fabulous electric that we produce to other states and Lord knows who else. But would it be a good use of, let's say, maybe the interest or even maybe some principal from our state land grant or our permanent funds for the state to start doing this, for the state to take charge and just, push it forward? Maybe we could do some of that and not have to have, I don't know, external corporations do it for us. Just something I'm wondering as you talk about transmission. Thank you.
Thanks, Muriel. Good question. We actually, a couple of things to say about that. We actually have a very good renewable energy transmission authority in the state of New Mexico. And they are very proactive in terms of helping to build the transmission lines that we need to get the renewable energy. For example, the Eastern Plains is where the wind is, but the big cities are along the Rio Grande Valley. So we needed to build transmission lines from the plains to the cities, and they're basically doing that. There's also a big transmission corridor called SunZia to ship some of that wind and other renewable energy to out-of-state markets to the west, to
Okay.
Arizona and points like California. So some
And
of
are
that
we,
is already happening, and
okay.
the limiting factor is not really funding. It tends to be just getting the rights of way approval. And it is a very complicated thing to build transmission lines across the United States because every individual jurisdiction has the ability to say no, and they
Mhm.
all need to be negotiated with individually. And that's
Is this where government taking comes in or eminent domain or is that part of
those
it?
are eminent domain is one of the tools that they use. They use it as the last resort
Okay.
because they don't, no,
Yeah.
nobody likes to have the government
Not
come
popular.
in and say, I'm taking your land and here's a little bit to pay for it, but probably not what it's worth. They really try to negotiate,
Okay.
which they do, but it just takes time. And
And
then there are environmental concerns, and you have to go across rivers and maybe through sensitive habitats or
mhm.
culturally sensitive areas, and just all of that takes time. And so,
And you say that we have plenty of funding for that. And what's the source of that funding? I'm glad to hear
right,
it.
yeah, private industry is willing to pay for it. Uh, Actually, for the SunZia line, I think a lot of that funding came from came from customers in Southern California that really, really needs the power. So, there are, and especially in the current environment where we just no longer have enough generating capacity on the grid to handle, as we convert to electric vehicles, we will need to generate more electricity. As we build more heat pumps, we'll need to make more electricity. Unfortunately, as we build more data centers, we will need more electricity. All of that stuff is driving up the load demand, and people are willing to pay for it. So,
Right. And could you give me the name again of the authority that you talked about, the
Yeah, the
transmission?
acronym is RETA, RETA.
Okay,
It's the Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. And they were created under the Bill Richardson administration. I don't know, when was that? 15 years ago, something like that.
thank you.
It's a pretty forward-looking authority because he'd been energy secretary and he knew that there was the need in the state to do that.
Thank
And
you.
looks like Muriel Steffi has put up the link to.
No, I don't know where that came. I think that
Oh, that
was,
was a Zoom call. Huh?
yeah, I think this is
Yeah,
the
if you
one.
just Google Rita, it's right there.
Yeah, the simpler one is Rita. Sorry.
Rita.com, yeah.
Yeah. Paula has another question.
Okay.
Oh,
Only if nobody else does. I'm happy to wait. Okay,
Oh.
there's another one.
You want
I
to go
just
to
wanna-
Julie
I-
first
Julie
and then
and then
Paula?
Jim.
I just want to put my 2 cents in on Mario's question. Renewable Energy Transmission Authority. So renewable is right in the name of the authority. So they were created specifically for generation to transmit generation from renewables. And I don't remember what the litmus test is, but there's a litmus test. The power has to be a certain percentage of renewable before they can finance the transmission, and also I believe they have bonding capacity, so that's another source of funds.
Hmm.
It's a government agency.
Hmm.
And they're also very interested in storage.
Hmm.
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
Julie.
So I wanted to ask about what you mentioned just a minute ago about data centers, particularly with HB 93, and just I'm interested to hear your thoughts about sort of what we do about that, given the way things are going.
Can you ask a more specific question?
Well, I mean, we're sort of, I guess your talk is looking at, how do we wean off of fossil fuels? And now with HB 93, we basically opened the door to have data centers run on fossil fuels and given them an exemption from the Energy Transition Act until 2045. And even then, it's squishier than the rules of the Energy Transition Act.
Yeah,
And so I'm just wondering,
what's my
I
take
mean,
on that? Yeah.
yeah, what's your take on that? And kind of what's the path to deal with it? What can we do?
Well, I would say one thing, which is that if a data center wants power right now, they should build a solar farm with battery backup. They will get the power lots and lots faster than building a gas-fired power plant, and it'll be cheaper, and the people around it will like it a lot better. Um, the lead time to obtain a gas turbine for a power plant is in the many years, several years time frame. So there are pretty significant barriers to building these gas plants quickly. Um, my understanding of was it SB or HB 93 was that they only can build a gas plant if it's off grid. So as soon as they connect their system to the grid, they are subject to all of the existing rules of the Energy Transition Act, which means, and because of that, the pricing for building those things, given that deadline, is pretty high because they have to amortize the cost, depreciate the cost over a much shorter time frame, right? They have to be zero carbon by 2045, which means there's only 20 years that they can defray the costs over, which makes it more expensive. And solar and wind, or solar and battery costs continue to decline. We are not seeing and not gonna see those same kind of declines in costs for gas plants. I think there's a number of things that we can do to slow down that rush. I would also say that I count me among those very skeptical that the supposed boom in the demand for artificial intelligence is going to actually play out the way a lot of people are talking about it in such a way that it would justify building all of these AI data centers. My look at the information that's there is that, you know, most people you ask in the industry can't figure out how all of this data center AI investment is going to pay for itself. The revenue is just not there by like orders of magnitude, not there. So I think it is a bubble that will be burst in the next few years. So, but we'll see.
Do you have any idea then why planet Jupiter is going with gas turbines?
Project Jupiter.
Project Jupiter.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry. A
Um,
little different there.
I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
they say the data centers require 24/7 baseload power, which, for them is a gas-fired power plant. I think it's not even a combined cycle gas plant that
No,
they're
it's a single cycle.
it's
Yeah.
a single cycle, which is the dirtiest and most expensive version of it. Um, That's what I know. I am not an expert on Project Jupiter. Maybe Jim is. You have
Yeah,
some.
let me just add a couple of things because Julie, I think that's a very poignant and timely discussion. One on the timeline of building these plants. Tom's absolutely right. If you go out to buy even a single cycle turbine, you have to wait. But people have told me know more about it than I do is I think that some of these companies have turbines, a stockpile of turbines. They're standardizing on a single cycle plant and they have turbines in hand. So that's one thing. Um, there is going to be, there already is, and there will be larger resistance to the Project Jupiter. And the chilling fact about that single cycle plant they're trying to put in is the pollution from that, the carbon footprint of that is going to be something on the order of equal the entire P&M carbon footprint. So these are not little plants. And the other part of that is it will take a an, a permit from the state, air quality permit from the state to build that plant. So right now, people are working on how we're going to stop that permitting process, and that's a place a pressure point on how to stop it. Doñana County Commission, as you know from reading the papers, totally rolled over. There's some lawsuits there because there are rules that some people are alleging the county commission didn't follow in due diligence. And so it's going to be challenged on a number of levels, but it's a real serious threat to our energy goals in this state for sure.
Um, I'd love to hear from you. We can take this off because it's a little bit to the side of the point of this, but I'd love to talk with you more about this and hear more about like who's really on this and who I should talk to about it.
Okay. Jim, why don't you put your email in the chat?
Okay, we'll do that. Good. Thank you
Thanks.
for your interest. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Tom, I had a question about the push now for liquid natural gas. And the governor just had this announcement about Japan, and of course, the Trump administration is pushing this through the Gulf. Do you think that would have any impact on managed decline? And the second question is, are we going to have all these wonderful sovereign funds and we're going to end up spending it rescuing people since there's no FEMA for democratic states and climate change is going to be increasing all of our costs even more.
Okay. Let me answer the second one first. I think there are statutory and maybe even constitutional restrictions on how you can spend the permanent funds. And, they have to return revenues and interest to the state to provide, for the schools, et cetera. That's written into statute, written into the Constitution. There is not the kind of flexibility that people think there is to just spend those funds on things that we want to spend it on. You have to carve it out and basically invest it in something. So, and the investment needs to be justified. There are fiduciary requirements for the rate of return that it needs to achieve in order to match that. So I don't think, unless a lot of stuff changed in law and potentially in the Constitution, that we could just spend those funds to replace gaps that the federal government may carve out in the state budget. So that's one. And also, we will have a different administration in 3.5 years. Yes, we will. And it'll be better. I firmly believe that, and we'll work towards making that happen.
Both at the state and the national level.
And yeah, we'll have a different state government in a year. So liquid natural gas, I have always been skeptical of any projections for the increase in the export potential of LNG outside the state. The rest of the world understands the urgency of climate change even more than we do. If you look at the carbon footprint of shipping LNG over the ocean, the amount of boil off that you get of methane, a very potent natural gas, it is substantially dirtier than coal if you add all that stuff together. The United States is not what anybody would call a stable partner, a stable client, to engage in more investment. Why would any other country want to be dependent upon, this industry out of this country at this point in time? I certainly would not be. And I think the rest of the world is trying to figure out how to replace the use of natural gas with heat pumps and all of those things. So that's where I come down on all of that.
Do we have a last question or two?
Let's see, is there anything new in the chat?
No,
Steffi's been putting some stuff about agrivoltaics and redwood energy.
yeah,
Good, yes, good for you.
I have one final question.
Okay.
Does the levelized cost of energy include the cost of replacement? I'm thinking about long-term sustainability of wind and solar panels. Do we have plans for recycling these things?
We do have plans for recycling them. It's not that big a deal. I know in the in the popular or the oppositional press, they try to make a big deal out of it. We haven't recycled solar panels and wind turbines because we haven't had to, because they're still continuing to operate. Does the levelized cost of energy include that? I believe it does,
Yes, it
actually.
does.
I think it does. Specifically, I'm aware that it does for decommissioning a nuclear power plant. So it would, they would be consistent in terms of adding in the cost of decommissioning for all sources of energy. I haven't dug into it, what they assume for decommissioning for a wind farm. But I bet if you go to lazard.com and dig into their reports, they probably do have something in there. They're pretty comprehensive and detailed about sharing their assumptions.
Thank you.
Just real quickly, Walter, the reason, and for everyone, the reason that you hear that phrase levelized cost when you're talking about energy is because it gives you an apples to apples view of different energy technologies. And the way it does that is, for instance, a typical solar panel lasts 25 years. So the way you, and it decreases a little bit over time, et cetera. So the way you get to a levelized cost is you put in the original cost, the cost of decommissioning, you divide that by its production over the lifespan of it, and that gives you a watt per kilowatt.
Dollar per kilowatt hour.
Thank you, dollars per kilowatt. Well, you can do the same thing with a coal plant. And it's not perfect because we know, for instance, we're looking at the San Juan coal plant right now, and there is a fund that's been set aside over the life of that San Juan power plant to pay for decommissioning. We're finding out now, well, some of us knew it wasn't sufficient. It wasn't a realistic number. So actually, that coal plant was more expensive per unit of electricity than we were looking at. So we weren't exactly getting apples to apples, but that's the general methodology of how you get to levelized cost.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're talking about solar, there's no fuel cost. When you're talking about a coal plant, levelized cost includes fuel and maintenance. So that's.
Yeah, it's just that you hear all sorts of naysayers saying, well, what are we going to do with all those wind turbine blades and all those solar panels and that? But I think that's sort of a red herring, but just wanted to get your opinion.
It's absolutely red herring. We will do the same thing with them that we do with all of the cars that come off of the road. We will recycle them, and there are companies that are starting to do that. They just haven't geared up because we're still using it all. I would, since we're on that topic, there was a really great Dave Roberts Volts podcast talking to Redwood Materials, which is the company that is built to reuse and recycle the minerals that come out of battery packs. And so, there is not yet a very large volume of used battery packs, lithium ion battery packs. It is starting to grow because, it was only about 10 or more years ago that we started building EVs in volume. But they are gearing up for it in a big way. And what they have found is that, a typical electric vehicle battery pack may get retired when it's only got 80% of its capacity left. Well, rather than just grinding up the lithium ion cells to recover the materials that are in there, they're just basically laying them out on the ground and hooking them up to the grid because there's still 80% of the battery pack that's got a useful life in it. And that is tremendously more value than immediately grinding up the batteries. But that is their ultimate plan. And when you think about it, mining for copper or mining for lithium, maybe 1 or 2% of the ore is actually the mineral that you want. So you got to process 98% of this, dirt in order to get to the precious little bit that you care about. It is completely the opposite if you've already got a battery cell that is composed pretty much largely of nickel and cobalt and lithium and all of the precious minerals that you want, right? It's already 90% the good stuff. And so you grind that up and find a way to extract it, which is not that hard if you're a mining company. or know anything about electrochemistry. And it is a very efficient way of going after those minerals. So after we mine and generate the big pool of critical minerals needed to support a clean energy economy, the amount of mining for those minerals will go down because we will already have a pool of it that we can recycle after its 10, 15-year useful life. And we will do that because it makes economic sense. It was a really good podcast. It made me think that vehicle to grid is really going to be a thing. It's just going to have a 10-year lag time in between when you pick the vehicle and you plug it into the grid. You have to wait for the battery pack to be retired. Steffi.
Yeah, it was a very inspiring podcast. I just want to mention one other thing that's a different kind of decline that we have not really done anything in this state with, but other states have done, which is trying to reduce the gas company pipelines. They get paid for putting in the pipelines, not for selling gas. And if we really want to reduce the use of gas in our state, there's a lot of work ahead of us. But I've been watching these 3 webinars about what other states have done, and it's really inspiring there too. But that's going to be another battlefront in the future here.
That's a fight, especially in this state. Yep. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, and let me just pause to see if there are, then we can adjourn. As I said, we're recording this. Takes me a few days to process the recording, but everybody who signed up for the Zoom call, I have your email, and I will send out a subsequent email later on in the week, and it'll have the recording, and it'll have a link to the slides, so you'll be able to see them at that time.
They'll also, thank you, Tom. It was a very interesting evening. Thank you for the response. Everybody stuck with it. But I also want to plug our website because it will have the slide deck, Tom's slide deck, and the recording on it. And it also goes back 4 or 5 years with other speaker series. And it's just a wealth of information about a lot of the topics we talked about here tonight. So, and I want to thank Steffi in particular for working on the website. She does an enormous amount.
I'm behind. Don't look at the website.
That's a perpetual problem.
It is plenty good enough, Steffi, and
Well,
it's quite an accomplishment. So,
and thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.
yeah, great to see you all. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.